Welcome, my name is Matt Wilson, and thank you for listening to the Table Talk series on the Fireground podcast. The Table Talk series is much more of a free-flow discussion between friends and peers on reading, leadership, successes, failures, Fireground tactics, and much more. Today I'm joined with Brandon Laird. Brandon shares an approach he developed to standardize Fireground size-up. Size-ups are one of those skills that can be done in several different ways, and as a result can be overwhelming for first-time officers or even tenured officers that may have never had a good approach. Brandon and I talk about a standardized approach to use and practice so that size-ups are the same every time. They account for all aspects of an emergency response and eventually become second nature. After you've listened, head over to our Facebook group, Firedog Mentorship, or any of our other social media pages to continue the conversation. All right, what's up, Brandon?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me. We got some cool things to talk about, some things that, as we were discussing before I hit record, that maybe there's a need out there. Other people see this need because I've put some stuff together on Fireground Size Up, and you've done the same, and you came up with an acronym yourself. But I think it's good information that, maybe to get some other people thinking, and or maybe it'll give a tool for their toolbox. So before we dive into all of that stuff, though, how about you just give us a background of who you are, your fire service experience, and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So my name is Brandon Laird. So I entered active duty Air Force in August of 2015. I did 3 years in the horrible place of Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. Then I went over and did a year and a half at Osan Air Base in Korea. And then I finished out my active duty career with 2 years at Ramstein Air Base. And after that, I had some family things that popped up, so I left active duty, transferred to the reserves, and I worked. I kind of left fire for a little bit, and I went and worked in an EMS system in Fresno, California. So I served an EMS system that runs about 1,000 calls a day. And everything from psychiatric emergencies to overdoses, cardiac arrest, everything. So it was a really good experience to be able to see all that stuff on a day-to-day basis in terms of instead of on the Air Force side where you see it every now and then.
What are you doing now? Are you still doing that?
So right now I am in the hiring process with Camp Parks Fire Department in Dublin, California, which is Army Reserve Base, I believe. Um, just waiting for the start date. Really, I recently got married and I moved from Fresno to the Sacramento area. My wife is active duty and she's stationed at Beale, and I'm a reservist at Beale as well.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to mention that. I knew that you're still in the reserves, so a lot of DoD relevance here. Of course, former active
Yeah,
duty Air Force firefighter, and with outside experience, it's a pretty unique skill set that not of a lot of us have in active duty. Aside from some that may volunteer or maybe had experience before they joined, so that's good. Although it's EMS, I mean EMS is, gosh, what is it? Probably 70-80% of our response volume, anyways. So
oh
I
yeah,
can,
absolutely. That's kind of the thing I always preach to when I was a captain is or company officer is just that you may never go on a fire when you're in the Air Force, but you absolutely will go on a real medical emergency one day, and you need to
absolutely,
know your stuff.
yeah, everywhere. Stuff's always happening. Yeah. I'm up in Alaska at Eielson, and people see it maybe as a Sleepy Hollow, kind of a middle of nowhere place, but man, we've had some significant calls just recently here, so it happens everywhere.
I believe it.
All right, well, let's dive into it. So, what you brought to the table here is basically a an idea or an approach to conducting a size up. Like if I'm a new company officer, how do I do this? You had brought up
Absolutely.
that IFSTA and NFPA don't necessarily address it. Now we address it a bit in, I think we address kind of in broad strokes in Fire Officer 2, Fire Officer 3, Fire Officer 1. But what is a good standardized approach as a company officer in conducting a size up? What do I see? What am I going to do about it? What do I need? And you developed an acronym to kind of help people out with that.
Absolutely. So as far as size ups go, size ups to me, size ups are the first step in incident stabilization. And the old adage of the fire goes as the first hose goes, I believe is true. But I believe the fire goes uh, where the fire goes starts before lines even come off the engine, and that has to be with a good size up. And The thing that I came up with is an acronym CANCER. So CANC3R, and what it stands for is conditions, actions, needs, command, 360, and report. And I'll kind of dive into that a little bit more, but like we were talking about, I created the acronym to kind of fill a gap. We have acronyms for running the entirety of an incident, or measuring hazmats, conducting search, but I've never seen one specifically for size ups, which is what cancer is used for. NFPA 1021 has absolutely nothing in the NFPA about how a size up needs to be conducted. IFSTA does, but it doesn't necessarily care how it's done. It just wants it to be done. So to fill that gap, I came up with used, and I've taught it to a lot of the company officers that I shadowed on my active duty time, and even now on my reserve time as a assistant chief of training in the reserves.
Yeah, I mean, the need is certainly there. Now, I can understand from the NFPA perspective, from kind of a strategic level, it's like I don't want to tell people how to do the job necessarily, because there's a bunch of different ways to conduct a size up, right? And everybody has different protocol and procedure. So I can understand that. So yeah, it's incumbent upon company officers at our level, at the fire department level, to kind of figure out how we do this. And some departments do that through, like I said, SOP, and through their instruction. But sometimes maybe it's too vague, and we got to take it upon ourselves to figure out what works for us. Yeah, it looks like you've done that here. And as we were talking before we hit record, I did something similar because I saw the same need, and I saw it as a young firefighter, and as I grew up, I saw that there wasn't a standardized approach. Everybody kind of does things a different way, but there are a lot of similarities. And then when I kind of stepped into the chief officer role, or senior fire officer role, and I'm sitting here listening to the radio with a little bit of tenure behind me, I'm like, man, how can I impose upon these guys and girls a good way of doing business?
Yeah.
Because what I'm hearing, and it could be me and my OCD, but it's sloppy, and I want to try to do something and create something that is standardized, that everybody can follow, that it's easy to understand, especially when you're not in a position mentally to think things through because of the chaotic nature of the emergency. So I developed a presentation too, and like you were mentioning, it's really similar to what you got.
Yeah, I think that keeping things simple and easy to remember is important, especially in high stress scenarios. We're always going to fall back on the lowest level of training and experience that we have. And in teaching this cancer acronym to company officer candidates, learning this acronym really seemed to take a lot of stress of moving into that company officer or captain role off of their shoulders, and allowed them to focus more on the, in my opinion, other important things, like how to direct tactics and to establish rapport with the crew, instead of stressing out about how they're going to conduct the size up and how they're going to sound over the radio.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really good point. You think so much about, all right, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it, right? And you just focus so much attention on that, and you don't want the distractions and the noise in your peripherals. You don't want somebody asking you questions. I'm worried about how I'm going to sound on the mic. And if you can create that muscle memory with that through an acronym like what you created, or through a process like what you created, or something like I created, if you can kind of embed that into your mental Rolodex, you don't even have to think about it. It's second nature. This is what I see. This is what I'm doing about it. This is what I need. And then anything else. And Aaron Fields, I don't know if you're familiar with Aaron Fields. He does the nozzle forward tactics. One thing he mentioned when I went to his 2-day seminar a handful of years ago, his nozzle forward seminar, and he said radio communications in Seattle Fire Department are so specific in that I do a size up, and it's brief. Like the incident commander does a size up. They make sure that it's brief, and then after that, anything that I hear on the radio is an audible. So it piques everybody's ears, right? So because it's such a standardized process, I say the size up, this is what we're doing about it, and they actually had action plans. Execute action plan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, based on the type of construction or whatever the scenario that they're facing. So here's my size up. We're going to execute action plan 1, go. And then there's radio silence, right? Everybody's going to work. And then if somebody says something on the radio, that means they're calling an audible. So I'm softening the building on the Charlie side. I'm softening the building on the Bravo side, right? Like, okay, that's an audible. That's not a part of action plan 1. So now as a firefighter, as a company officer, I'm like, that's something I'm going to listen to. So that's just another reason to have a kind of a standardized approach is, everybody hears it all the time, that same standardized approach. And then anything else that's outside of that, everybody listens to, piques their interest.
Yeah.
So, well, let's get into it and break down the acronym itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, cancer, it stands for, you could actually refer to it as sea cancer, but I feel like it's just easier to remember the less letters you throw into it. So, cancer stands for conditions in construction, actions, needs, command 360, and report 360. So, you just have to think about it like a simple CAN report with a couple extra steps added onto it. So when we're talking about the conditions in construction, what I really wanted officers to do is, just tell me, what are you arriving to? Paint a picture for the incoming units and the senior fire officer that's responding. The better communication of the conditions that you arrive to, the better things will start to move on the fire ground once units start showing up. And there's really 3 key points that you want to identify in terms of the C in cancer, right? So you have building size or aircraft type, building height, and the building occupancy. And if you arrive to smoke or fire, where is it coming from? That's what I want to know. And I can dive a little bit more into some specifics about each point, right? So for building size, describing building size and building type is a mixed bag subject. But the best way for fire departments I have found to judge a building size is based off of how much of this building can I cover with my pre-connect, right? So 200 feet, if I can cover 100% of this building, that's a small building to me. If I can cover 75%, then that's a medium-sized building. And if the answer is that I can only cover less than 75% of this building just looking at it, then that's a large building. And in terms of aircraft, each aircraft presents its own hazards. So identifying that the emergency involves an F-16 as opposed to an A-10 or a C-130 as opposed to a C-5 drastically changes our response.
Yeah, the aircraft is a bit easier. I got an A-10. Everybody knows what an A-10 looks like if you're, familiar with it at your installation. But building, man, there is a little complication in the building. So, yeah, that I hear sometimes type of construction thrown out there, and it's like, number one, why is that relevant?
Mm-hmm.
If it's type 5 construction, okay, this thing's going to burn quick. I get it. If it's type 4 construction, heavy timber, okay, this thing's going to be burning hot, long, and then the potential for collapse is pretty dangerous. I guess it's dangerous in any circumstance.
Yeah.
But most of our constructions are type 1, 2, 3, or type 2 and 3.
Yeah.
But what relevance does that necessarily have and this is just my opinion, I could be wrong on this. Number one, what relevance does that have in how I'm going to approach the building? Number two, who knows exactly what type 2 and 3 is? Number three, do you as the company officer know? And sometimes it's listed in pre-fire plan, so if you got that right in front of you, then okay, I can understand why you would say it. You got it right in front of you, know that it is, but nobody's really doing that. I don't think most people are going to do that, open the pre-fire plan as I'm conducting the size up, or maybe it really well. But what I try to tell people is just forget about the type. Say it in layman's terms, what you see, right? And like what you said, and I think that is an awesome piece of advice, is using your how far can my pre-connect go in determining the small, medium, large. Excellent point. That's a really good, easy thing to remember, right? I know I got 200 feet or, whatever, and I know that it can stretch this far, and it's important to train and understand how far it can stretch. Now you got to determine distance from the road to the entrance, distance from the entrance to the seat of the fire, to the back of the building, right? So there's a little training and understanding that goes in that. But I always say, just tell me what you see. I see a brick building. I see a metal roof. I see a flat roof, right? I see 4 sides. I see, I'm at the commissary. I'm at the BX. I'm at this store. When I say that, everybody on the radio is like, oh, I've been there, right? I know what that building looks like, right? I don't have to go through and give a dissertation on the type of construction that this thing is. So Those are just my little inputs there. But I mean, I'm not saying don't say type of construction. Maybe your
No,
SOP
yeah.
tells you to do that. I'm saying
Hmm.
say things that everybody's going to understand, right?
Absolutely.
So,
And so for me, I always choose to identify the building occupancy as opposed to the type. Because if you pull up on scene, like I said, it's a high stress scenario. Uh, you're more likely to misjudge the building type when you just pull up on scene. You're getting off the truck, trying to direct your crew and everything. So, identify the occupancy. Because if you tell me that you're on scene of a type 3, that could be so many different things like you were talking about. But if you say, I'm on scene to an apartment complex. Okay, I know exactly what I'm showing up to then.
hmm
If I'm an active officer, I should know my response area and I should know what building type I'm going to.
sure.
And for most military bases, type 1, type 2, type 3, sometimes you'll see type 5 in family housing, but it's not very common. So, I mean, we don't have too big of a bag. So, in
Mm-mm.
terms of building types,
Sure.
but occupancies are just spread all over the
Absolutely.
place in our response areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Building familiarization is such an important piece of this. But anyway, yeah, understanding your district, understanding your area responsibility. We could do a whole nother episode on that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
no, great points.
As far as building height goes, so identifying the height of the building is instrumental in terms of knowing that ground ladders can be used for rescue and ventilation adequately, or if an aerial may be needed, right? So some bases don't have an aerial at their disposal, but most of the time that's usually planned for. If a base does have a need for an aerial at any structure on base, usually they'll have one available to them. It'll be in their response bag essentially. But identifying the height of a building can, even without saying it, identify the use of standpipes as a possibility. NFPA 14 says that any building that's over 4 stories or any parking structure that's over 2 stories has to have standpipes. So, knowing that information and listening to the radio can really send a lot of information without having to say a lot of words.
Absolutely. And building height, I mean, it's as simple as stories, right? For the most
Yeah.
part.
And then for smoke and fire, so if you show up to smoke and fire, like I said, where's it coming from and what are you seeing, right? So you can also use, if you're familiar with it, use some smoke reading here. For me personally, I like to save that for my 360 so I can better identify it though. Uh, but it's definitely an instrumental thing to tell you the stages of the fire and things of that nature.
And that's something I think that
So,
we're good at, right? I
I'm
mean,
sorry,
you're
go
going to,
ahead.
yeah, I think that's something that we're good at. I mean, identifying smoke and fire, right? One thing that the handful of fires that I've been involved with, one thing that I have heard is if it's on fire, people have a inclination to say fully involved,
Yeah,
and but is it though? Is it actually fully involved?
yeah,
Because when I hear fully involved, I'm thinking this every piece of real estate is on fire, right? And that does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but is there something salvageable, savable here? I'm rolling up onto a house fire, single story, fully involved. Where is the fire actually? Like, try to get more specificity in there.
yeah. And I mean, like, so once I get through all the points, I'll kind of give a
Okay,
little rundown of like how I would size up
absolutely.
with like the White House because it's a pretty easy thing for any of the listeners to be able to look up and then they can listen and they can understand at the same time.
Okay, sounds good.
So in the final point of the C part of cancer for no fire emergencies like motor vehicle accidents, hazmats, or rescues. For motor vehicle accidents, communicate how many cars are involved, what kind of crash was it? Was it a rollover, head-on collision, T-bone, and is there a possibility of entrapment? Because you really want to, if there is a possibility of entrapment, you have that golden hour to worry about, right? For hazmats, tell me what you can see. You really don't want to get too close usually until you know what you're dealing with, but is it a facility, a truck, container? Is there a visible DOT number that you can relay? And can you see any affected victims? And for rescues, what kind of rescue is it going to be? Low angle, high angle? What's the status of the victims if you can see them? Trying to relay that information to the responding crews that are coming with you, right?
So that was the C. That's the first C, right? Everything.
So that covered both conditions and construction.
Okay.
So conditions and construction, you're worried about building size or aircraft type, building height, building occupancy, smoke or fire, and from where.
Hmm.
And then for MVAs, hazmats, and rescues, you're just worried about conditions, right? Because there's no construction really involved.
Sure.
So, where are you arriving to? Just paint that picture for me.
And to mention it in simpler terms, um, the first thing you're doing is telling me all that you see with as much specificity and brevity. It's like finding the dichotomy between those two things, right? So just
Yeah.
tell me in simple terms what you're seeing with as much specificity and much brevity as you can think. Now that takes practice, and it's much easier said than done. But
Yeah,
again, it's a good protocol.
there is a lot that goes into understanding the acronym, but the actual application of it takes
There
up
you go.
maybe 20 seconds of radio time. I mean, like once you actually understand everything that goes into this, I mean, it's not even really anything that's hard to learn. It's basic stuff that we already know,
Right.
but putting it into, a line by line item that we can understand and remember pretty easily.
Yeah. Very well said.
So moving into moving on in the cancer acronym, moving on to the A, or the actions or strategy. So, based off the conditions that you described, now you need to choose your action and strategy. And we typically choose from 4 strategies of offensive, defensive, investigative, and rescue. And a disclaimer for the rescue strategy: always reference your department's SOPs and SOGs in terms of rescue mode, if it's even applicable under those SOPs or SOGs.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen is fast attack mode.
Yes.
I've seen that in some SOPs. So if you're a single engine company and the officer, I'm going into fast attack mode, meaning I'm going to go inside the building as the incident commander or as the first fire officer on scene because there's a viable rescue or the potential for a viable rescue, right? So that it doesn't hamstring that company officer to have to hang out outside and wait for another company to show up. Like, I'm going to fast attack mode. I'm not going to wait for anybody. I'm going to go to try to save a life. So again,
Yeah, absolutely.
great point. Reference your SOPs.
Yeah, and a good thing to remember too when you're considering your actions, right, is that as the first arriving officer, you need to give direction to your crew and the next arriving crew as well. Because until you're relieved by the senior fire officer of command, you are the incident commander, and you need to think bigger than just your crew. So, consider what is the next task that needs to be filled in the scenario that you arrive to, that will aid you the best, right? So, like, if you have a confirmed victim on the Fireground, do you want your next arriving engine to stop and establish a water supply, or do you want them to come up, dump their tank into your engine and go in with you as a search? So getting creative and figuring out, what task needs to be completed next is really the thing. Don't try to make yourself into a cookie cutter, right? Stay nimble on your toes and always have a next plan.
And speaking on viable rescue, I mean, some would argue there's always the potential for victim entrapment, regardless of the information that you have, right? It's a good approach to have. A lot of people would argue that, and shout out to Andrew Kehoe. He always brings that up.
Any building is occupied until verified otherwise.
You said it better. Yep, there you go. That's exactly. Now, make your decisions reasonably, though. If you do have a legitimate, fully involved circumstance, you obviously don't want to commit resources or firefighters. If it's not a viable living condition, and you have to use your judgment with that, don't send people in. And there are NIASH reports, and there's incidents that probably didn't have NIASH reports that highlight firefighters going into unlivable conditions and perishing themselves. There's one in Alabama where a volunteer firefighter, there was 2 of them that showed up on an engine. This is rural firefighting, so it's pretty common for 2 or even sometimes 1 firefighter to show up.
Yeah.
Well, they went in, or this one kid went in, and I say kid because he was like 18 or 19 years old. He made it 5 feet into this home and perished. It's like, it was, it's unfortunate, but I mean, it's just a good example of sometimes these, it's absolutely unlivable condition. and he was even in an ensemble. So, but
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard sometimes, especially at such a young and inexperienced age, to be able to correctly identify these things. But even though a lot of our company officers on the active duty side are on the younger side and maybe a little bit less experienced, I would like to think that the majority of them have the thinking skills to be able to identify what is and isn't a livable condition that they arrive to, right?
sure.
And water is always going to save lives. So if you can put water on that fire, you're going to make things better for you and everybody else involved as
Absolutely.
well.
That's another great point. I think that we're kind of fleshing that out of the fire service. From what I read and what I hear and what I listen to is the whole steam burn conversation, right? I don't want to put water on something because I could steam burn any potential entrapped victims. I feel like we're kind of fleshing that out well. Steam burn is much less worse than what's breathing in the byproduct of combustion or even succumbing to a fire entirely, right? So there's other videos on YouTube that I've seen where the firefighters in the yard are literally yelling, "Don't put water on it because of steam burn," right?
Yeah.
You have a house that is, let's say, half involved, and they're screaming at each other not to put water on it because they don't want to potentially steam burn anybody that's entrapped, right? And they end up losing the entire house, right? You could have saved half of that home, and even if it's going to get completely demolished, at least you have personal belongings that you could save, and obviously any entrapped victims. But so yeah, put water when you see fire. If you see fire, use water.
Absolutely.
When we're talking
And
home structure fire.
even if you're seeing smoke and stuff too, because
Absolutely.
if let's say you're in a hallway with a smoke-filled hallway, that is all unignited fuel.
Right, incomplete combustion.
at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so wet down that hallway, make the area more survivable for you, and you have to remember too that you as a firefighter, you're going in there. If you can feel the heat, through your PPE, anybody who is trapped in that structure can really feel that heat. And a lot of people, the majority, are not actually dying from burns. The majority are dying from the inhalation of the toxic superheated gases, right? So, cooling down the environment as soon as you can, and then extracting the victims is absolutely important. And those should be your first two priorities.
Yeah,
at all
Andrew
times.
Starnes, I can't remember what episode I spoke with him on, but go back and look for that one. He breaks it down. I mean, this guy has done his research.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that episode.
He was talking about basically the the human esophagus, or like the respiratory system is basically compromised at 120 degrees or something. Maybe it's as high as 106. I don't know. That's really high. So it's like, yeah, the best thing for anybody, especially entrapped victims without ensemble, without respiratory protection, is water. And even if you damage their home with water, which arguably water damage is not as bad as smoke or fire damage, right? Definitely not as bad as fire damage. But even Aaron Fields talks about that. It's like an insurance adjuster is going to come through and they're going to say, this is going to have to go, this is going to have to go, this is going to have to go if it was smoke damaged. But if it's water damage, it's potentially salvageable. So water is always the best option, right? And you make a great point, like treat smoke as fire. And not only that, but when you spray water, it acts as a ventilation mechanism too, right? Depending on how you use that nozzle. So all good points.
So moving back to the cancer acronym, so we've gone through C&A, so your conditions in construction, and now we've gone through your actions. And like I said, it's just a can report to start off. So what are your needs? So what additional resources are you going to need, whether they're fire department related or not, to help you in your chosen action or strategy? Examples of what you could be calling for are a full alarm or an additional alarm, maybe even mutual aid, mobile water supply, law enforcement, EMS, EM, EOD, etc. And specifically regarding EMS, how many units will you need? In my experience working EMS in Fresno, if the system would allow it, there would be 2 EMS units at any fire. One for victims, one for firefighters as needed.
That's a good SOP.
And then in terms of, what is your location like, right? So let's take Beale, for example. I don't know if you've ever been
Mm-hmm.
to Beale, but Beale is kind of in the middle of nowhere. Uh, and I think the nearest hospital is probably about 25 to 30 minutes from base. I could be wrong, but you may even need to request a medevac. So, try to get some kind of medevac helicopter going if that's within your SOPs or within
Mm-hmm.
your department's abilities to request. Um, just in terms of trying to get patients, whether it be from MVA or it might even be a house fire, trying to get them to the medical care as soon as possible. Getting them out of the structure is absolutely important, but just getting them out of the structure is not going to save their life. Getting them to the hospital, getting them to paramedic provider, and then also to the higher level of care at the hospital is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And another conversation on this particular piece of the acronym, the needs. You as a senior fire officer, as a chief officer, and whoever I guess develops SOPs within your department, you can make this easy for your company officers. I've seen it with box card systems, and I worked in a department that had a
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote box card system. Now you could make a bunch of different styles of box cards, right? But the premise is you have levels of a response. So your first level is a box, and then it could be full box, which is confirmed smoke or fire. Then it could be first alarm or second alarm and third alarm and fourth alarm, right? And so with each corresponding box, it comes with more resources. Now that's something as a chief fire officer you can predetermine, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I don't want my company officers or even your assistant fire chiefs, right? Whoever your on-duty assistant fire chief, battalion chief, whoever's making the decisions is going to be your primary incident commander. I don't want them kind of shooting from the hip, deciding what resources they want or don't want, right? Because this guy might bring 2 ladders, guy might bring 3 ambulances, this guy might say, oh, we only need 1 ambulance, right? So as a fire chief, you can develop a box card system and say, with a second alarm, you're getting 2 more engines, right? With a full box, you're getting a truck or a ladder, right? Ladder company, and so on and so forth, right? So as a company officer, as I'm rolling through this acronym, I've talked about my conditions, what I'm going to do about it, and now I can say as simple as upgrade this to a second alarm. That's it, right?
Yeah.
And that's accounting for your needs. Now, of course, like you had mentioned, there's specificity with needs sometimes. I might need EOD if it's an aircraft munitions involved incident, right? I might need EM, whatever. I might need more ambulances. I might need a medevac. But I think those are more rare.
Yeah.
Whereas the asking for more engine companies, asking for more truck companies or ambulances is a much more common thing. So develop a
Yeah.
box card and make it easy for your company officers. Just my
Yeah, I
pitch.
don't think I've ever seen the box cards. I know I've seen the different response angles, or I'm sorry, the different response
Mm-hmm.
levels. Especially working at Ramstein, we had 8 fire
Mm.
stations, so we actually had the capability to fill a full alarm and even fill a
Mm-hmm.
second alarm.
So how did it work there then?
Which
If
is
you had a fire, who's making the decision on what companies go?
So it was already predetermined, right? So you had three battalions. So in the battalion that I worked in was completely structural. We had no airfield. So for any fire within that battalion, you had 2 engines and a ladder truck going. Um, and the other two battalions, they had two engines automatically going, and then the ladder truck from the battalion that I worked in would usually respond as well.
What about routine fire
And
alarm activations? Who's going on those?
routine fire alarm activation, it was dependent on the
Mm.
structure. So for me, I worked in housing at the housing station, and just a single engine basically
Okay.
to everything, unless it was the elementary school. The elementary school got two engines sent to any alarm, and then like the commissary got 2 engines sent to any alarm, uh, and so that was kind of like the
Hmm.
basic response was for any large structures, you were going to get 2 engines
Okay.
usually.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a thousand ways to do it, and maybe you don't call it a box card system, just some kind of standardized approach to the complement of resources that you get, right? And making it easier for that company officer
Yeah.
or that battalion chief to say, upgrade this to a second alarm, I don't got to think about it now. I got the resources coming to the scene that the fire chief wants, right? And that I know is going to be able to handle this. But, if you have to make audibles here or there, I need another engine for this, or I need another ambulance for this, obviously you should be able to do that as well. Just my pitch.
So, oh, yeah, absolutely. In terms of needs, so, we talked about resources, but, going back to, making sure that you're thinking about more than just your crew, what are the tasks that need to be filled? There are 6 tasks or groups that need to be filled by one team on each fireground. And what order those tasks are filled is at the discretion of the IC, dependent on the conditions. And those groups or tasks are fire attack, your secondary line, search and rescue, ventilation, RIC, and water supply. And you don't necessarily need to have a team that fills water supply, but having water supply established is important. And depending on the situation, you might have to have two engines or 2 engineers and plugmen dedicated to water supply. So it's all dependent on the situation, right?
Yeah. What is the... Stand by 1 second. I got the book on my bookshelf, I think. I do. Hold on a second.
Yeah, no worries.
So I sat through this class, and this company still does this training. It's called InSource. And okay. I'm sure there's a bunch of companies that do stuff like this. But what you were mentioning kind of jogged my memory a little bit. He has this worksheet that they developed where you list your problem, strategy, tactic, and units assigned to that. So I guess in this case, my problem is going to be my fire attack, water supply, rapid intervention, ventilation, and then the strategy on how I'm going to do that. You list everything out on here, but it's just another way to do business. But I guess this just kind of points to what we were saying earlier, that there's a 1,000 ways to skin it, and everybody kind of has the same idea. We need a standardized approach to doing a size up and determine our strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I've always presented this to people through. And so I went to Goodfellow in November to help develop the Fire Officers Strategy, Tactics, and Leadership course, FOSLIC, and which should be launching soon. Not quite sure of the date. But cancer was one of the things that I tried to present, and I tried to put into some of the workings that I wrote up in terms of just the size up of the incident, trying to get some kind of standardized thing that's going to be taught to Air Force fire officers. So moving on into cancer, we're almost done. So now we move into command. So you've described the incident, and you've arrived to. Now you can establish command. Too many times I've listened in on calls, and I've heard officers at every level simply establish command and never describe the incident, and it just really grinds my gears. And I feel like this only sets us up for failure. Like, I get it. You go into buildings that are constantly having alarms go off, that you get tired of sizing it up every time. But get the reps in, man. Like, just size it up. If you can make your own decisions in your head if this were a real incident. So don't ever skip an opportunity to practice.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the presentation that I provided to you. I think let me look through it real quick. What did I say? Yeah, practice the right way every time so that you're ready when you need it. Mm-hmm. So that, it's developing that muscle memory so that you go into the mental Rolodex that you don't have to think about, and you just, spat it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, give your command a distinguishable name other than just command. So this is something that it's more useful in larger departments like Ramstein or Eglin or I believe, is it Eielson that is the larger department in
No, it's
Alaska?
J-Bear, Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson.
Okay,
Yeah,
Javier. Okay, but when you have a larger department, if you have two different incidents going on and both of them are named command, the dispatcher is more likely to mix up communication.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so giving like Main Street Command,
yep,
Blue House Command, just give it a distinguishable name, or even whatever
sure.
engine you arrive on, Engine 28 Command, whatever it might be. Just give it that
Yep.
command, and then identify your command post and accountability. But in terms of establishing command, I really want officers, especially guys that are arriving on an engine, to keep in mind that the engine officer is going to be needed on that first line going in more than the incident commander is needed to run the incident from the outside. So, the command is most likely going to be mobile, which, some people don't like, but especially if you have, a young A1C or a pretty new GS worker or LN worker that is on the backseat of that engine that's on the nozzle, having that experience of the fire officer coming in behind them is going to be so much more beneficial than keeping that company officer outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do get into the habit as incident commanders. Well, not all of us. To maybe get too much in the weeds, especially on serious incidents.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's needed, but most of the time it's not. So yeah, kind of detach and be that broader, have that broader perspective, and let the company officers be company officers. Unless you see something negligent or unsafe,
Yeah.
don't intervene. Let them do their work.
Yeah, and I mean, like it's all situational dependent too, right? So like, if I have, let's say like a seasoned, if I'm a staff sergeant, right, riding in the crew chief position, and I have a seasoned civilian or I have a seasoned senior airman that's fire officer 1 certified on my back seat, and I trust them, absolutely I can send them in as that officer on that hand line, and I can fill in on IRIC with my driver. But if I have 2 brand new A1Cs, there's absolutely no reason I should be sending those 2 in just so I can run command from the outside. That's very negligent and it's going to get somebody hurt. So just, keeping in mind that experience is very beneficial. You need to have one person that knows what they're doing that's going in. Two A1Cs, even if they have that prior fire experience, they may not have the correct amount of experience that they need to be going into that fire.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I'm glad you said that. I don't see that too often, but every once in a while you do. And
Every once in a while.
I attribute it to laziness more than anything, or maybe a lack of confidence in the company officer. Like why would you ever send 2 inexperienced people in? And I think in my mind it's probably because I don't want to do the work, or maybe I'm too scared. I've seen
Yeah.
that sometimes. And in that case, it's incumbent upon the senior fire officers to mentor, teach, and remove that person from the position if necessary. But yeah, that's a great
Absolutely.
point.
Like for me, I look at the company officer and I love being a company officer. It's the leader of the grunts essentially, right? So like the king grunt almost. Uh, it's great because you get to be at that first level of supervision, but that first level of supervision is still in the trenches and it's still getting dirty. So, keeping that in mind that is the company officer's role is essential.
Gosh,
The company officer's
preaching.
role is to lead the getting into the
Preach.
trenches.
You see this with routine work that's not emergency related, right? You need to be you
Yeah.
need to be getting dirty day to day through training or whatever it is, maintenance of the station. Yeah, you need to be a leader, the worker leader. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. All right, so we're wrapping up. We're into the 360, and for any of the listeners, if you disregard everything that I say, for the love of everything, do not disregard a 360. Uh, conducting a 360 to assess the scene further, identify hazards, and formulate a more solid initial action plan. Do not skip a 360. Do not ever skip a 360. If you look at line of duty deaths failure to conduct a 360 is a very extremely common attribute in those line of duty deaths. So skipping that 360, could lead to catastrophic failure.
Yeah, it's easy to get, what is it called? It's easy to focus in on the problem at hand and not, again, detach and think about a broader perspective and look around the backside of the building. Great point that NIOSH reports consistently, these line of duty death NIOSH reports consistently show lack of size up, lack of continual size up. And this is an even more important point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, you should do your 360 when you show up, but you should continually size up and call audibles, call adjustments, right? Continually look at the backside of the building, the Charlie side, or put another officer over there. I've heard of departments having Charlie side cams that are linked to their, their battalion chief unit or whatever. But continual size up, continual 360. Always look around.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up a sidebar in terms of the incident safety officer. That if there's an incident safety officer that shows up, whether it be a different company officer or the HSO that shows up on scene, or even the station chief, that them showing up and conducting their own size up, their own 360, is never going to hurt anybody. It's probably going to save lives, if anything, because by the time that ISO is assigned, things have already started rolling, things have already started happening. So, how have the conditions changed in that 360 view is really important to identify.
Absolutely.
So the 360 is used to identify things like smoke conditions, crawl spaces, gas and electrical shutoffs, vehicle ejections, leaks, exposures, and correctly identifying, building construction if you can. Like I said, it can be pretty easy to misidentify it when you first roll up on scene. So take that 360 time to try to really identify the true building construction. And the 360 does not require you to make a full circle around the scene. It just requires you to see all sides, right? So, if I'm pulling up on scene from the delta side of the structure, I saw the delta side when I'm pulling up on the alpha side.
Yep.
All I need to do is see that Bravo and Charlie.
Yeah, and if you can't get to the Charlie, if you just peek your head around too, it doesn't have to be. Some of us, my mind included, I have to check every box on the checklist, right? Like some of us are wired that way. Obsessive compulsive, whatever you want to call it. I guess don't tie yourself up in something like that. Like do what you can in the moment, right? And if you can't do it, communicate to everybody. Hey, if I get somebody on the Charlie side, give me a look. Or next in unit, you're coming from that side. Can you give me a look and communicate it to the? I'll do that. When I worked as an assistant chief, I would do that all the time. Like crash whatever, engine whatever. Once you get there, tell everybody what it looks like. Give us a size up. Don't be afraid to use other units for something like that too.
Absolutely. For me, I like to do a 360 because it gives me time to accurately identify things. The construction, smoke conditions, but it also gives me a chance to take a breath and take off the horse blinders, and really see what we're going into before me and my guys go to work. Right. So, take that 360 as a chance to really take a breath. It's a high stress scenario. It's always going to be, try to take that breath, get your heart rate down a little bit, and, get ready to go.
That's a tough thing to do too. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
I'll find myself doing breathing exercises in the truck on the way. Like, all right.
Yeah.
Kind of coaching yourself up.
All right. So wrapping up cancer, we move on to the final part, the report. So, once you've completed the 360, report any additional findings, hazards, needs, or changes to your IEP over the radio to dispatch and the responding units. So, you might show up on scene and think, oh, you're seeing smoke, but you get around to the Charlie side and the Charlie side's fully involved. So that kind of changes your response at that point, right? So doing the 360 is important in terms of identifying, the hazards, but also, do you need to make a change to what your initial actions is going to be? You might have said that you were going to make entries through the alpha side, but now you need to go through the Charlie because you have heavier conditions on that side, or whatever the situation might be, right? Just always be ready to audible.
Well, that about wraps all of it up, huh?
Yeah, I got a little bit more. It took a long time to get through each part of it, right? But just to kind of give an example of how short the actual application of it is. So I'll give an example radio report for the White House, right? So, anybody who's listening can pull up a picture of the White House and listen to what I'm saying. And like I said, it's going to take 20 seconds at the most to do it. So, Engine 1 is on scene at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to a large 2-story mixed-use residential structure. There's no smoke or fire showing. We'll be investigating. I have no additional needs at this time. Engine 1 Alpha is establishing White House command. Accountability is at Engine 1. Standby 360.
So, yeah, that's for no showing. Nothing showing. Gets a bit more complex when there is something showing, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex, but like it's 20 30 seconds. You're not writing an audiobook, right? You're communicating as much information as you can while being as simple as possible.
A common point that we've mentioned throughout, just as much specificity and brevity at the same time, and just think.
Yeah.
I always try to think from others' perspectives when I'm talking on the radio too. Even, let's call it the lowest ranked firefighter. I want them to be able to understand what I'm saying. This is what I see.
Absolutely.
This is what we're doing. This is what I need. This is where I'm going to be if you need me. Don't complicate things.
Yeah. And as far as like a outlook for cancer, I built, like I said before, I built this specifically for our younger Air Force fire officers who are typically less experienced than our civilian counterparts on the other side of the fence. When you break it down, as I just did, there's a lot that goes into the understanding of it, but it's not nearly as much that goes into the application.
Well said.
And if I had it my way in the Air Force, I would want cancer taught to any senior airman, staff sergeant, or civilian employee going through their Officer 1. I think that it's a really good thing to try to, as you said, standardize something that is as important as the size up.
Yeah, that's where it's FLOSLIC is how you say it, right? FOSLIC.
Yeah, FOSLIC.
Fire Officer Strategy and Tactics Leadership Course. That's where something like that would really come in, be handy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for that course to launch. It's not my thing to talk about.
And I'm not sure that it necessarily will. I know there's a lot of complicated variables behind the scenes, but we could still take this information. You could do it. You don't need a strategic level course at a fire academy. You can do this as a staff sergeant, as a GS8, as a captain.
Absolutely.
Even as a younger engineer or firefighter, you can take this stuff, you can practice it, you can train on it, and just be better. Create a standardized approach in your mind. And again, disclaimer: follow your department's SOPs. Read them and follow them. Don't do your own thing because you heard it on a podcast or because it's the best approach, right?
Yeah,
always do what your department tells you to do, but within that construct, find where this can fit. No matter where you are, you have to do a size up. And how can I standardize the department's approach, to work for everybody? So action items for everybody listening. Pick a building, a home, something in your response area. Practice a report, a size up report based on hypothetical scenarios. I do this all the time. And have your crew do the same thing. Maybe they're going to see something that you don't, right? You get their perspective. This is what they're thinking about. And do that over and over again. Pick different buildings. Man, this is a great company officer proficiency training exercise, right? Like, we don't got to do nothing. We don't got to pull equipment off. We can drive around, or we can even look at pictures of buildings, right? If you're in a place like Eielson, Alaska, where it's very cold and you can't maybe bring trucks outside during the wintertime. I can look at pictures and I can go through this. We could sit at the coffee table or at the kitchen table drinking coffee, look at pictures of buildings, have our SOP open, have something like this acronym written out on a whiteboard, and let's roll through it. I do it all the time. And that presentation that I sent to you and I put on the Firedog Mentorship Facebook group a while back, 2021, it's got a picture of a scenario, actual it happened scenario, and then the next slide is a video. So go on to YouTube of that actual scenario and what that company officer or that incident commander said, during their size up. What's San Bernardino County, California? Yeah. Excellent public outreach. They got an excellent YouTube. They have helmet cams on a lot of their firefighters, if not all of them. I'm not sure how many have them, but so they record everything that they do and everything that they say, and then they put it onto YouTube. I mean, it's amazing. But talk about living vicariously through someone else, right? Through someone else's experience. Like, I get to see what he said, what they did, and the outcome of that. I mean, it's amazing training. So yeah, bring up a picture, as and just go through it yourself. Have your crew do the same, and then just talk about it. Obviously you got to do other things too, man. You got to learn about your building construction. You got to learn about how far your pre-connects are going to work. You got to work through that kind of stuff too. But and then the other action item I wrote down was look at your SOG, SOP, FMI, whatever you call it on conducting a size up. I think we said that plenty here. Just make sure that you're working. Yeah. You're doing things in accordance with your standard operating procedure.
You're doing your due diligence to what the department is already pre-prepared for.
Cool. Well, Brandon, I appreciate you, man. Great conversation. Do you got anything else, man? We got it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love the conversation.
We'll do more stuff like it, man. We'll pick something else and do it again. This is the kind of stuff that I think is great.
Absolutely. And if any of the listeners want to get a hold of some kind of I do have a slideshow and a lesson plan for teaching this. So if anybody wants it, they can look me up on the global brandon.laird.1 at us.af.mil. And I'd be glad to share it and send it over as well.
Is it something that, is it a large file? Is it something I could upload to a Facebook group?
I think I tried to upload the slideshow to the Facebook group, but it didn't really want to go through. I don't know if it was an issue on my end or something, but I could try to upload it.
What I had to do with mine, because I got videos embedded in mine, like 6, I had to just grab the links to those videos, and I had to PDF my presentation and then just put the YouTube link so that instead of having the video embedded within the presentation, it just linked it to YouTube. So it's just a workaround, because if the file is more than like 25 megabytes, it ain't going anywhere. So, but yeah, if we can make it work, we'll put it on the Firedog Mentorship page, Mentorship group. If you're not a member of that, look it up. It's Firedog Mentorship. If you don't follow the Facebook page, it's the Firedog Podcast, and you can find the group within the Firedog Podcast page. So, and we'll throw up all this stuff along with the episode information all together. Cool, Brandon. Well, I appreciate your time, man. Great stuff here. Great standardized approach. I love it. And we'll talk more on some other stuff sometime in the future. All right, buddy. All right.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Great to talk to you. You have a good one. All right, bye.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Firedog Podcast. You can find more episodes just like this on our website, firedog.us, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We are at the Firedog Podcast. That is the Fire, DAWG Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, to stay plugged into every new episode. And lastly, we'd love it if you share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, either on social media or within your firehouse. This is Matt Wilson with guest Brandon Laird. Until next time, stay safe.